Welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. I'm your host for this session. I'm Sean.
And I'm Kevin.
And together we're going to talk about a unique problem that you might be having in your sales process and your sales world. This 15 minutes is designed for salespeople, sales managers, and CEOs of the company that are trying to increase their revenue and trying to be more productive in your sales processes. So let's get started. I'm going to talk about one of my personal peeves of my career. And I've had a long career. For those of you who have never met me, you can kind of look at our show notes. You'll see a guy with lots of gray hair. That's me. I've been doing this for a long time. So I've been in sales for 38 years now. One of the things that I despised when I was a sales rep, and one of the things I despised even when I was a junior sales manager, district manager, whatever, but not the guy in charge of the sales team, was I hated it when compensation plans came out in April when our fiscal year started in January. So it meant the first 3 months, nobody knew what they were selling, nobody knew what they were paid for, nobody knew what their goals were. It's one of those things that's a pet peeve of mine. In my world, if you're one of my clients, because now I'm a fractional VP of sales, I deliver to the owner of the company in November what the sales plan is going to be, what the compensation plan will be for next year. I then deliver that in November. We negotiate for the entire month of November because I'm probably changing a lot of things to make it more productive. I am then going to work with the CFO, accountants, whatever, to get it all budgeted and not locked in. And then I deliver it to the salesperson on the first Monday of December. Comes into work, I hand him a piece of paper and I say, here's your compensation plan for next year. So we got 30 days to understand it, review it, make sure it makes sense to him, have all those questions so that on January 1st, we are ready to go. Kevin, what do you think about compensation plans, early, late, all that stuff?
I'm in the same camp with you on the early versus late. I've also been there and not known what I was going to make. Or it's funny, if you have a good first quarter and you don't get your plan till the beginning of the second quarter, it's amazing how much growth you're expected to deliver in that year. It's just really coincidental. But what's interesting about that is since I've been there, I know how painful that is and how inappropriate that is. If we're talking about what are some best business management practices, having your year goals, compensation plans, job descriptions written ahead of time is a best practice. And so we want to advocate for best practices. I don't want to sit here and hammer somebody who's got a business that they're trying to build right now and a compensation plan is not in place even at all. You and I have walked into different prospects and clients where they said, we don't really have a formal compensation plan. It's not written out. It's not been reviewed in 12 years. And what that might look like is a real pain or embarrassment point. And I don't want owners to feel embarrassed. I want them to know that we have the skills to take them to a place of comfort and security and surety that their salespeople will appreciate. We're culture additive in that regard. One thing I want to point out here is also compensation plans should, just rule of thumb here, there's always exceptions, but rule of thumb, a compensation plan should be simple. It should be, like fifth grade math kind of simple. We shouldn't have to get out the abacus and look at hidden costs and cost adders and subtractors. And, there are overly complex plans out there that have formed over time. Typically, the most complex ones are the ones that have just not been updated in a long time. They've been form-fitted and form-fitted and form-fitted to fit a scenario. If you can ask yourself as an owner a couple of questions, what do I want the salespeople to make? What do I want them to sell? That will get you 90% of the way to your first compensation plan. Because if you know what you want them to sell, let's just say I want them to sell at least $1.5 million a piece, and I want them to make about $80,000 to $100,000. You can say, well, based on either the revenue or the gross margin, here's the commission rate. It's just that simple. And if they exceed that, double, triple, whatever the number is, put some escalators in there. That's fine. If they're making more money and you're making more money, we'll all have a Merry Christmas kind of thinking. Where this tends to fall apart is when we try and over-engineer things like, oh, well, that's a commodity. It's got a really low margins. We want to do this and that, and all these special scenarios. When we have all these special scenarios, that's where people like Sean and I come in and say, hey, well, time out, guys. Despite those special scenarios, with them factored in or out, it's still about the same amount of dollars. Or we'll design a plan where it takes that into consideration so you don't have to. If you're a CEO sitting out there, an owner or somebody in charge of a comp plan, a CFO, we can help you through this mental spreadsheet to get to where you need to be. Compensation plans are the bedrock for someone's earnings. And we should treat it as such, not as a cost line. If a sales rep has sold and booked deals for you, you should be paying people for them. And that shouldn't change in the middle of the game. One of my pet peeves is changing a comp plan mid-year because somebody's making too much money. That's on me for not designing a good plan. We want people to be successful and win based on the construct of what we've incentivized them to do. You want to add new logos? Incentivize adding net new business. You want to encourage professional services agreements? Incentivize those. If you're trying to get new users to a launched SaaS platform, you got to discount the user rate to get users and logos in. Next year, we'll think about adding the strategic logos. We got to stress test the back end. Let's incentivize the behaviors. All these things are what Sean and I bring to bear.
That's a really good point. And I'm so glad that you talked about new logos and whatever, because I'm a firm believer that some of those things shouldn't be buried in the calculation of the percentage of the revenue that comes in. Pull that information out and say, if my reps would close 10 new logos next year, that would be fantastic. Regardless of how much they actually brought in revenue, if they brought in 10 new logos, that would change my business. Go ahead and make that an MBO, management by objective. MBOs are great. You can say, let's just go back to that 10. You can say, well, for the first 5, I'm going to give them a bonus of some amount of money. And for the next 2, I'm going to give them an additional bonus. And then the last 3, I'm going to give them additional bonus. You can actually stage that and make that a little bit growth oriented. The whole goal here is not to make it more complicated in calculating the commission based on revenue, but to make it a separate thing that they can easily pull out. I have to close 3 new accounts, or I have to close 10 new accounts. That's important. It's important for you. It's important for the business. So let's go ahead and pull it out and make that as a separate thing. But you're still going to pay them on how much revenue was generated by those. But maybe your business doesn't get a lot of new revenue from brand new logos. Maybe the revenue is for the next year, 2 years from now, after we've had those new logos for a while. And that's perfectly good, but you want to keep on having those goals be achieved. So those company goals have to be aligned in the compensation plan. Now, why are we talking about this right now? We're talking about this, we're probably going to drop this episode sometime in early November, and it's time to get busy. It's time for you to start thinking about, what are my next year's goals? Now, you may not have already thought about your next year's goals as a company. If you're part of EOS, it's not uncommon to say that my quarterly or my annual sales planning or company planning event isn't until December. How am I supposed to do that? No, you're going to have to do it. Just as simple as that. Where do you want to be as a company? Kevin, you started out with saying how much money do you want the sales reps make? First thing you have to do is how much money do you need as a company? And that number as a company leader, as a CEO of a small company, CEO of a big company, CFO of a big company, what number do you want? That's all you really need to do. Say the number and you load it back into your sales director, your VP of sales, and say, what should we do? So, Kevin, what do you think so far?
I don't want to move too far off this topic because I think that in our dialogue here, we probably are stirring the pot with some folks out there. If I'm a CEO and I heard, wow, Kevin and Sean both said sometimes the logos are important regardless of the price. If I'm a bootstrapping kind of SaaS company, I'm a little worried about that. So let's dig into that from hey, what is a CEO thinking when they hear, I'm not concerned with price? Because they're probably jumping right to margin. And where I come in, my response, you probably have an additional comment here. My response is always, hey, we need to prove out that our model works, especially if it's an alpha set of customers or a beta set of customers. We've got to prove that our process works, our adoption and rollout pieces work. We've got to get active customers buying. We've got to get referenceable customers buying. We need customers, regardless of profitability, frankly, that we can start building in customer testimonials. We have to build our marketing wheel if we're an early SaaS company. If we're a restaurant, the same thing applies. We need people talking about our brand, so we're giving away meals. If we're in a B2B professional services organization, we've got to have a list of people we can call and say, hey, did you enjoy working with us?
All of those things make a lot of sense. And I am not saying that you shouldn't worry about profitability. In fact, I'll actually say that you need to worry about profitability more than almost everything else. When I said earlier, we talked about what's the revenue I want to make. Well, also, what is the profit that I want to make on that? If I'm a $20 million company and I want to make 10% net profit after taxes, maybe before taxes, or whatever, however you want to do it, that number has to be established. And we need to work within that. That means that Mr. CEO and Mr. CFO, you better know what your costs truly are, because I'm going to build a plan that's going to help you to get there. And your VP of sales is going to build a plan that's going to help you get there. And your salespeople are going to work a plan that's going to help you get there. But you better know what your costs truly are. If you have a machine shop with 10 different machines in it, you better know how much it costs to cut metal or cut aluminum or whatever you do in that machine shop. If you have a professional services organization, you better know how much every one of those people costs. When you put them out on a job, you know that you are charging more than they are charging you to work for you. You have to figure out those things, and those costs have to be understood and communicated fairly to the VP of sales. The VP of sales can say, okay, I know I only have this much margin left in that revenue dollar to give away as commission. And that's the magic of writing a great compensation plan, is to make sure that you maximize the things that you want to maximize to grow your business within that budget that you put together, so that you actually can have a very, very compelling message to your sales team about what they have to do. And you can incent them adequately so that they go out there and they hunt bear. And let's be honest, that's what we want them to do.
And hunting bear is a fun analogy because it's a thing that can kill you, right? You're hunting something that can categorically end you, and that's what oftentimes we as salespeople are charged to do. If we don't make the number and people are not busy, the business can implode. But let's take that same scenario. You mentioned if you're a $10 or $20 million company, what about that one company that's trying to grow to their first million? That's a fun market share, and it's really high stress where this probably, I know that some of the listeners on here are in that space. They're trying to consume our content so they can learn, because they're not ready to bring on a VP of sales, even fractionally. They're a owner, developer, or technician that is opening and starting a business. When they're looking across the spectrum of how can they spend their money, how can they monetize their brain or their skills for the commercial good, the value we offer to them has a lot to do in this moment with what is their market strategy. Are they going to market as a price fighter? Are they going as a high-end value? They have to decide not just who they're serving, but how they're serving them. We got about a minute and a half here. Sean, what's your thought about that one trying to go to their first million?
Yeah, if you're trying to get your first million, and we talked about this in a couple episodes ago, I think to some degree, we talked about the idea of getting your first 10, then getting your second 20 or second 10 clients and getting them on board. Your first 10, it is whatever moves, you got to close. You just have to. You have to figure out, how am I going to get this deal closed and how am I going to make this work? What are you going to incent your salespeople are? Now, remember, compensation plans, we have very little time to talk about this, so maybe we should do this on a future episode in more detail. Compensation plans are how you attract talent to your company as well. Not only are you keeping your salespeople there, but you're bringing people in. And they're going to ask the sales guy when they go to lunch with them, they're going to say, hey, is this a good company to work for? Or they're going to ask on LinkedIn, but they were going to ask your existing salespeople. And they go, no, you're not going to make any money here. That's not the kind of people that you want to bring in, the people that want to work for a company where they don't make money. You need to have a compensation plan that drives that behavior. And on your first 10 customers, your first 20 customers, you may not be rewarding based on revenue because you really don't know. You may be rewarding on new logos and just on the new logo itself. You may be rewarding on, do we get them to be a reference for us? you may be rewarding on a lot of different factors other than revenue. And that's perfectly fine, especially for a brand new company. Because when you're at 20 customers, then we're going to talk to you about how are you going to make 20% margin on those customers. That's going to be important. But for right now, that's all at the end of our episode. We do appreciate your time. We look forward to you having you come back. Please check us out next Tuesday where we're back with two tall guys talking sales.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again for joining Kevin and Sean on Two Tall Guys Talking Sales. Tune in every Tuesday, or when our podcast drops every Tuesday at 4:30, wherever you consume your podcast. And don't miss our monthly CEO workshop where we unpack some of the big CEO questions facing your business. Until next time, we're looking forward to seeing you. Happy selling.